I'm proud of you. 4 words. That's all it took. 4 simple words that changed everything. But the man who said them, he didn't know the boy's name. He didn't know where he came from. He didn't even know if the boy would survive the winter. And yet, 60 years later, that boy would spend his entire life trying to find him. This is the story of Hans, a starving child in war-torn Berlin, and the American soldier who gave him more than chocolate that night. He gave him hope. He gave him humanity. He gave him a reason to believe that even in the darkest moment of history, kindness could still exist. But it would take half a century before Hans would learn the soldier's name. And when he finally did, the truth would break his heart. Let me tell you how a single piece of chocolate became the most important moment in a man's life. May 14th, 1945. The war in Europe was over. 9 days earlier, Nazi Germany had surrendered. The Third Reich had fallen. And Berlin was unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. Buildings that had stood for centuries were now hollow shells, their windows shattered, their walls crumbling. The streets were filled with debris, twisted metal, broken glass, the remnants of a civilization that had destroyed itself. And in those ruins, people were trying to survive. Hans Weber was 11 years old, but if you saw him, you'd think he was 8, maybe 7. Malnutrition had stunted his growth. His face was gaunt, his eyes were hollow, his clothes were too big, hanging off his thin frame like rags on a scarecrow. He lived with his mother and younger brother, Eric, in the basement of what used to be an apartment building. The upper floors had been destroyed in a bombing raid 2 years earlier. Now, the basement was home to 3 families, 15 people sharing a space meant for storage. There was no electricity, no running water, no heat. In the winter, they burned whatever they could find. Broken furniture, old books, sometimes just paper, anything to keep from freezing. But winter was behind them now. It was May. The weather was warming. And yet, the hunger remained. Hans's father had died 3 years earlier. He'd been drafted into the Wehrmacht in 1941 and sent to the Eastern Front. The family received notice of his death in the spring of 1942. No details, just a form letter saying he had died in service to the fatherland. His mother did what she could. She traded whatever they had left for food: a silver ring for a loaf of bread, a wool coat for a bag of potatoes. Piece by piece, their past was exchanged for survival. But by May of 1945, there was nothing left to trade, and food was scarce. The supply lines had collapsed, the black market was expensive, and every day the question was the same: will we eat today? Hans tried to help. Every morning, he would leave the basement and walk through the streets, looking for anything useful. Scraps of metal that could be traded, bits of food left behind by soldiers, firewood, anything. He knew the city like the back of his hand. He knew which streets were safe, which buildings might collapse, where the Soviet patrols were stationed, where the British and American soldiers had set up checkpoints. And on the morning of May 14th, 1945, Hans was walking through the Tiergarten district when he saw something he hadn't seen before. Trucks. American trucks. Dozens of them. The Americans had arrived in Berlin just days earlier. Under the terms of the surrender, the city had been divided into 4 occupation zones: Soviet, British, French, and American. The Western Allies were only now beginning to establish their sectors. Hans had heard about the Americans. Everyone had. They were the conquerors, the victors, the enemy. But standing there, watching the convoy roll through the broken streets, Hans didn't feel fear. He felt curiosity. The soldiers looked different than he'd expected. They were young. Some of them looked barely older than teenagers. They wore clean uniforms. They had cigarettes, chocolate, chewing gum. Things Hans hadn't seen in years. And they didn't look angry. They looked tired, relieved, like men who'd survived something terrible and were grateful to still be alive. The convoy stopped near what used to be a city park. Now it was just another stretch of barren ground. The soldiers began unloading supplies, setting up tents, building a temporary camp. Hans watched from a distance. He wasn't the only one. A handful of other children had gathered as well. Silent, cautious, keeping their distance. No one approached the soldiers. No one dared. The adults had warned them. Stay away from the occupiers. Don't cause trouble. Don't draw attention. But Hans was hungry, and he could smell food. The soldiers were cooking. He could see smoke rising from a field kitchen. The smell of meat and bread drifted through the air. It had been months since Hans had smelled anything like it. His stomach twisted painfully. He stood there for over an hour, just watching, hoping, waiting for... He didn't know what. A miracle, maybe. A scrap of food thrown away. Anything. But nothing came. As the afternoon faded into evening, most of the other children left. They went home to their families, to their basements and bombed-out buildings, to whatever meager dinner might be waiting. But Hans stayed. He couldn't go home empty-handed again. His mother's face when he returned with nothing. He couldn't bear to see it one more time. Eric hadn't eaten in 2 days. His little brother was 6 years old, and he'd stopped crying about the hunger. That was worse than the crying. The silence. So Hans stayed. And as the sun set, the soldiers erected a wire fence around their camp. Nothing elaborate, just a simple perimeter, a boundary. And Hans stood outside that boundary, watching through the wire. That's when one of them noticed him. His name was Robert Miller, 22 years old, from a small town in Pennsylvania. He'd been drafted in 1943, trained at Fort Benning, and shipped to Europe in early 1944. He'd landed at Normandy 3 weeks after D-Day. He'd seen things no 22-year-old should see. Friends killed, villages destroyed, the liberation of a concentration camp that left him unable to sleep for weeks. And now, standing in Berlin, looking at the ruins of the enemy's capital, Robert Miller felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. He'd been assigned guard duty that evening, walking the perimeter, making sure no one entered the camp, standard procedure. That's when he saw the boy, standing outside the fence, thin, pale, staring at the camp with hollow eyes. Robert had seen children like this before, in France, in Belgium, in every town they'd passed through. The war had left millions of them, orphans, refugees, starving. At first he was going to ignore him. Orders were clear. No fraternization with the locals. Don't give away supplies. Don't encourage them to linger. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the boy stood so still, not begging, not crying, just existing, waiting for nothing. Robert reached into his pocket. He always carried a chocolate bar, part of his rations. He hadn't eaten it yet. He'd been saving it. He walked toward the fence. The boy watched him approach but didn't move, didn't react, like he'd learned not to hope for anything. Robert held out the chocolate bar through the wire. "Here," he said. The boy stared at the chocolate, then at Robert, then back at the chocolate. He didn't take it. Robert realized why a moment later. Other children had appeared. 5, 6, 7 of them, emerging from the ruins like ghosts. They'd been watching, waiting, and now they were all staring at that single chocolate bar. Robert looked at the children, then at the chocolate, then back at the children. 7 kids, 1 chocolate bar. He could give it to the first boy. the one who'd been standing there the longest. But what about the others? Would they fight over it? Would the strongest take it? Would the smallest go home with nothing? Robert Miller made a decision. He unwrapped the chocolate bar. The children watched, their eyes locked on his hands. And then, carefully, deliberately, he broke the chocolate into pieces. It wasn't easy. The chocolate was hard, cold, but he pressed his thumbs into it, snapping it along the grooves. 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. He broke it into 8 pieces. Small pieces. Barely a bite each. But 8 pieces. Enough for everyone. The children stared in disbelief. Robert held out the first piece through the fence. The boy who'd been standing there first took it slowly. His hand trembled. He looked at Robert like he couldn't believe this was real. Then the second child stepped forward. A girl, maybe 9 years old. Robert handed her a piece. Then the third. Then the fourth. One by one, each child received a small piece of chocolate. And one by one, they stepped back, holding their treasure like it was made of gold. Hans was last. He'd waited for everyone else. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because he'd been there first and felt responsible for the others somehow. Robert handed him the final piece. Their eyes met through the wire fence. "Everything's going to be okay, kid," Robert said. Hans didn't understand the words. He didn't speak English, but he understood the tone. He understood the kindness in the soldier's eyes. He took the chocolate. And for the first time in months, he smiled. The chocolate was gone in seconds. All 8 children ate their pieces immediately. It was the sweetest thing most of them had tasted in years. Some of them had never tasted chocolate before at all. But the taste wasn't what mattered. Not really. What mattered was the gesture. The moment when a soldier from the conquering army looked at enemy children and saw children, human beings, kids who needed help. Hans walked home that night with the taste of chocolate still on his tongue. But more importantly, he walked home with something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. For years, the world had taught him that survival meant taking what you could. That kindness was weakness. That in times of war, it was every man for himself. But that soldier had done something different. He'd had 1 chocolate bar and 8 hungry children. He could have given it to one. He could have kept it for himself. Instead, he'd made sure everyone got a piece. When Hans got home that night, he told his mother what happened. She listened quietly, then pulled him close. "Remember this," she whispered. "Remember that even in the worst of times, there are still good people in the world." Hans nodded. He would remember. He would never forget. But he didn't know that this memory would shape the rest of his life. That this moment would become the lens through which he saw the world. That decades later, he would still be thinking about that soldier and that chocolate bar. And he certainly didn't know that one day he would try to find that soldier, to thank him, to tell him what that moment had meant. The months following May 1945 were difficult. Food remained scarce. The city was in ruins. But slowly, gradually, life began to return. Hans and his family survived. His mother found work cleaning for British officers. Eric grew stronger. And Hans went to school. Not immediately. At first, there were no schools. The buildings had been destroyed. The teachers were gone. The entire education system had collapsed. But by 1946, makeshift schools began to appear. Classes held in church basements, in damaged buildings that had been partially repaired. Anywhere they could find space. Hans was 12 by then. He should have been in 6th grade. But the war had stolen years of his education. He was placed in a class with younger children, learning things he should have learned years ago. He didn't mind. He was grateful just to be there, to have books, to have teachers, to have a future. And he worked hard, harder than anyone else in his class. He devoured every lesson, every book, every opportunity to learn, because he remembered what his mother had told him. Remember that there are still good people in the world. And Hans decided that he wanted to be one of those people. He wanted to be the kind of person who would give away his last piece of chocolate to make sure everyone had something. He wanted to be the kind of person who saw humanity in others, even when they were supposed to be enemies. By 1950, Hans had caught up. He graduated from secondary school at age 16. He was offered a place at a teacher training college. He accepted immediately. Hans became a teacher in 1955. He taught history at a school in East Berlin. For 45 years, he stood in front of classrooms and taught young people about the past. But more than dates and facts, he taught them lessons. He taught them about the Holocaust, about the horrors of war, about the dangers of hatred and nationalism. And every year, at some point in his curriculum, he would tell them a story. The story of a cold night in May 1945. The story of an American soldier and 8 hungry children. The story of a chocolate bar broken into 8 pieces. His students never forgot that story. Many of them would later say it was the most important lesson they'd learned in school, because it taught them something textbooks couldn't. It taught them that even in humanity's darkest moments, individual acts of kindness could shine through. That even when the world seemed beyond redemption, one person could still choose to do something good. But there was always one question Hans couldn't answer. What happened to the soldier? His students would ask. Did you ever see him again? And Hans would shake his head. No, I never saw him again. I don't even know his name. For 45 years, that was how the story ended. With an unknown soldier, a nameless act of kindness, a memory that could never be completed. Life continued. Hans married, had 2 children, watched Berlin rebuild itself only to be divided by a wall in 1961. He lived through the Cold War, saw the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, witnessed the reunification of Germany in 1990, and through it all, he taught. He told his story. He passed on the lesson he'd learned that night. But he never stopped wondering about the soldier. Who was he? Where was he from? Was he still alive? And then, in 2003, something changed. Hans retired from teaching in 2000 at the age of 66. For the first time in 45 years, he had time. Time to read, time to travel, time to think. And increasingly, he found himself thinking about that night, about the chocolate, about the soldier. He'd told the story so many times it was burned into his memory. Every detail, the way the soldier had walked toward the fence, the way he'd broken the chocolate, the look in his eyes. But he'd never tried to find him. Why not? He wasn't sure. Maybe because the search seemed impossible. How do you find one soldier among millions? How do you track down a man when you don't know his name, his unit, or even what he looked like beyond a vague childhood memory? But in 2003, Hans's daughter bought him a computer. She taught him how to use the internet, how to search for information, how to send emails. And Hans had an idea. He started researching. He learned about the American military units that had been stationed in Berlin in May 1945. He found websites dedicated to World War II veterans, forums where old soldiers shared memories. He wrote letters, dozens of them, hundreds of them. He contacted the U.S. Army. He reached out to veterans organizations. He posted messages on military history forums. His message was always the same. I am looking for an American soldier who was in Berlin in May 1945. He gave chocolate to children near a military camp in the Tiergarten district. I was one of those children. I would like to thank him. Most of his messages went unanswered. Some people responded with well wishes, but no information. A few told him his search was hopeless. Too much time had passed. Too many soldiers. Too little information. But Hans didn't give up. He spent hours every day searching, reading through military records that had been digitized, looking at photographs from 1945, trying to find any clue that might lead him to the soldier. His wife worried about him. "Why does it matter so much?" she asked. It was one moment. One piece of chocolate. Let it go. But Hans couldn't let it go. "That moment changed my life," he told her. "That soldier showed me that humanity could survive even in the worst of times. He taught me how to be a good person, and he never knew. He never knew what that meant to me. I need him to know." The search continued for 3 years. 3 years of emails and letters and dead ends. 3 years of hope and disappointment. And then, in November 2006, Hans received an email. It was from a man named David Miller. He lived in Pennsylvania. He was writing because he'd seen Hans's post on a World War II veterans forum. "I think you're looking for my grandfather," the email said. Hans read the email 3 times before he fully processed what it said. David Miller's grandfather had been in Berlin in May 1945. He'd been stationed in the Tiergarten district. He'd been part of the occupation force. His name was Robert Miller, and he died in 2001. Hans felt his heart sink. Too late. He was too late. The soldier was gone. But David's email continued. "My grandfather kept a journal during the war. After he passed away, we found it among his things. In one entry, dated May 14th, 1945, he wrote about giving chocolate to children in Berlin. He wrote about how he broke one bar into 8 pieces so everyone could have some. He wrote about a boy who waited for everyone else to get their piece first. He said that boy reminded him why he was fighting, why it all mattered. I think that boy was you." Hans couldn't breathe. He read the words again and again. The boy who waited. That was him. He'd waited. He'd made sure everyone else got their piece first. And the soldier had noticed. He'd remembered. He'd written it down. Hans wrote back immediately. He told David everything. About that night. About how it had changed him. About the 45 years he'd spent teaching children and telling them that story. About how he'd always wondered about the soldier. David responded the next day. He said his grandfather had been a good man. Quiet. Kind. He'd worked as a mechanic after the war. He'd rarely talked about his experiences in Europe. But that journal entry, David said it showed something about who his grandfather was. Over the following weeks, Hans and David exchanged more emails. David sent photographs of his grandfather. Hans stared at them, trying to match them to his memory of that night. It had been 61 years. He couldn't be certain. But something about the eyes. Yes, he thought he remembered those eyes. David also sent a photocopy of the journal entry. Hans held it in his hands, trembling. His daughter had to translate it for him. His English wasn't good enough to read the handwriting. The entry read, May 14th, 1945. Berlin. We've been here 3 days. The city is worse than anything I've seen. Worse than France. Worse than the camps. Everything is destroyed. Everyone is starving. Tonight on guard duty, I saw a boy outside the fence, skinny, maybe 10 or 11, just standing there watching us. I gave him my chocolate bar, but then more kids showed up. 7 or 8 of them, all hungry, all desperate. I couldn't give it to just one, so I broke it up, gave everyone a piece. It wasn't much, barely a bite each, but they acted like I'd given them gold. One boy waited until everyone else got theirs. He made sure the others were taken care of first. That boy, he reminded me why we're here, why this all mattered. I hope he makes it. I hope all of them make it. They deserve better than this." Hans read those words and cried. At 72 years old, he sat at his kitchen table and wept like a child. Because the soldier had cared, he'd remembered, he'd hoped Hans would survive. And Hans had survived. He'd lived. He'd taught hundreds of students. He'd passed on the lesson of that night to a new generation. In the spring of 2007, David Miller flew to Berlin. He wanted to meet Hans in person, to shake the hand of the boy his grandfather had helped. They met at a cafe near where the old military camp had been. The area looked completely different now. Modern buildings, busy streets, no trace of the ruins that had once defined this place. But Hans could still picture it. The fence, the soldier, the chocolate. David brought his grandfather's journal. He let Hans hold it. Hans ran his fingers over the words, even though he couldn't read them without help. They talked for hours. Hans told David about his life, about his teaching career, about the hundreds of times he'd told the story of Robert Miller and the chocolate bar, even before he knew the soldier's name. David told Hans about his grandfather, how he'd come home from the war and rarely spoke about it, how he'd been a gentleman who loved fixing things, how he'd died peacefully, surrounded by family. He would have wanted to know, David said quietly. He would have wanted to know that you survived, that you became a teacher, that his kindness mattered. It mattered more than he could have imagined, Hans replied. In 2008, Hans was invited to speak at a school in Pennsylvania. David had arranged it. It was Robert Miller's hometown. The school wanted to hear the story. Hans was 74 years old. He'd never flown across the Atlantic before. He'd never been to America. But he went. He stood in front of 500 students and told them about the night in May 1945, when their town's son had shown kindness to an enemy child. When Robert Miller had broken a chocolate bar into 8 pieces and taught a lesson that would echo across decades. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. After his speech, a line of students formed to meet him. They shook his hand. They thanked him for coming. Many of them were crying. One girl, maybe 14 years old, asked him, "Why did you spend so long looking for him? Why did it matter so much?" Hans thought about the question. He'd been asked it before. But somehow, here in Robert Miller's hometown, surrounded by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the people who'd known him, the answer felt clearer. Because kindness should be remembered, Hans said. Because good deeds should be honored. Because when someone does something that changes your life, they deserve to know. Your town's son, he didn't have to help me. He could have kept that chocolate for himself. He could have given it to one child and walked away. But he made sure everyone got a piece. He made sure the smallest among us didn't go home empty-handed. That night, I learned that humanity could survive even in the darkest times. I learned that one person could choose to be kind, even when everything around them was cruel. And I spent my life teaching that lesson to others. So yes, it mattered. It mattered enough that I spent 3 years searching for him. And even though I was too late to thank him in person, I can thank you, his family, his community. You raised a man who, in the middle of a war, still saw the humanity in his enemy's children. The students gave him a standing ovation. Later that day, David took Hans to the cemetery where Robert Miller was buried. Hans laid flowers on the grave. He stood there for a long time, silent, remembering. "Thank you," he whispered finally. "Thank you for that night. Thank you for the chocolate. Thank you for teaching me that kindness matters. Thank you for changing my life." The wind rustled through the trees. Birds sang. The world continued around them. But for Hans, that moment was sacred. After 63 years, he'd finally been able to say the words he'd always wanted to say. Thank you. Hans returned to Germany with a renewed sense of purpose. He was retired, but he wasn't finished. He began visiting schools again, not as a teacher this time, but as a guest speaker. He told his story. He showed students the photocopy of Robert Miller's journal entry. He talked about the power of small acts of kindness, and the students listened, because it wasn't just a history lesson, wasn't just a story about World War II. It was a lesson about humanity, about the choices we make, about the impact we have on others, even when we don't realize it. Hans calculated once that, over his 45 years of teaching, he'd taught approximately 3,000 students. 3,000 young people who'd heard the story of the chocolate bar, who'd learned about Robert Miller's kindness, and many of those students became teachers themselves, or social workers, or doctors, or simply parents who taught their own children about compassion. The ripple effect was incalculable. One soldier, one chocolate bar, one moment, and decades later, thousands of lives touched by that single act of kindness. David Miller started a small foundation in his grandfather's name. It provided school supplies to children in war-torn countries. Nothing elaborate, just basic supplies, pencils, notebooks, books, the kind of things Hans had needed after the war. Hans supported the foundation. He became its spokesperson in Germany. He helped raise funds. He helped identify schools that needed help. Together, they turned Robert Miller's moment of kindness into an ongoing legacy of support for children affected by war. In 2015, on the 70th anniversary of the chocolate bar moment, a ceremony was held in Berlin. At the site where the American camp had once stood, a small plaque was installed. It read, "In May 1945, on this site, U.S. Army Private Robert Miller shared his chocolate ration with 8 hungry children. His act of kindness reminded a broken city that humanity could survive even in war's darkest hours. This plaque honors all who choose compassion over hatred, generosity over greed, and hope over despair." Hans was there for the unveiling. So was David Miller, along with 3 of Robert's grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. 2 of the other children from that night were there too. They'd seen news coverage of Hans's search and had reached out. They remembered that night. They remembered the chocolate. They remembered the soldier who'd made sure everyone got a piece. The 3 of them stood together, in their 80s now, and shared their memories. They talked about how different their lives might have been without that moment, without that reminder that kindness existed. One of them, a woman named Greta, had become a nurse. She'd spent her career caring for others. The other, a man named Klaus, had become a social worker. He'd dedicated his life to helping refugees and displaced children. All 3 of them traced their life's purpose back to that moment, to the soldier who'd shown them that even enemies could be human, that even in war, compassion could exist. Hans lived to be 85 years old. In his final years, he slowed down. The speaking engagements became less frequent. The travel stopped. But the story never stopped. His grandchildren knew it by heart. His great-grandchildren had heard it countless times. It was part of their family history now. The night their great-grandfather met an American soldier who taught him about kindness. In the spring of 2019, Hans was diagnosed with cancer. The doctors said he had months, maybe a year. He accepted the news calmly. He'd lived a good life, a long life, a meaningful life. But there was one more thing he wanted to do. He asked his daughter to help him write a letter. Not to Robert Miller this time. Robert was gone. But to Robert's family. To David. To the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The letter took him 3 days to write. His daughter would read what he dictated, and he'd correct it, refine it, until the words were exactly right. The letter said, "Dear Miller family, I am writing this letter because I want you to know something. Something I've spent my entire life trying to understand and explain. On the night of May 14th, 1945, your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather did something that seemed small. He gave away a chocolate bar. He broke it into pieces so 8 hungry children could each have some. It took him maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. It was a tiny moment in the middle of a massive war. One act of kindness among millions of acts of violence. But that moment became the foundation of my life. That night, I learned that humanity could survive anything. That even when the world tried to teach us hatred, individuals could still choose love. That even when everything around us said we should be enemies, one person could still see the humanity in another. I became a teacher because of that night. I spent 45 years teaching children about history. But more importantly, I taught them about humanity, about the power of small kindnesses, about how one moment can change everything. Your Robert didn't just save my life that night. He didn't just feed a hungry child. He gave me a purpose. He gave me a lesson I could spend a lifetime sharing with others. I calculated once that I taught approximately 3,000 students during my career. I told all of them about your Robert, about the chocolate bar, about what it meant. Many of those students became teachers themselves, or nurses, or social workers, or simply good people who try to help others. So your Robert's kindness didn't just touch 8 children that night. It touched thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more. The ripple spread farther than anyone could have imagined. I'm writing this letter because I want you to know that. I want you to know that your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, he mattered. His kindness mattered. That moment mattered. I'm 85 years old now. I don't have much time left. But I'm not afraid. Because I know I lived a good life. I know I helped people. I know I passed on the lesson your Robert taught me. And when my time comes, I'll go peacefully. Because I know that somewhere, somehow, Robert Miller's kindness is still echoing through the world. Through the students I taught. Through the foundation David created. Through every person who heard the story and decided to be a little kinder. 1 chocolate bar, 8 pieces, 74 years of impact. Thank you for sharing him with the world. Thank you for raising a man who, even in war, chose kindness. With gratitude and respect, Hans Weber. David received the letter 3 weeks later. He read it to his entire family at a gathering. They all cried. They framed the letter. It hangs now in David's home, next to his grandfather's photograph and the photocopy of the journal entry from May 14th, 1945. Hans passed away in November 2019. He was surrounded by his family. His last words were in German, but his daughter later translated them. Tell the story. Always tell the story. At Hans's funeral, over 400 people attended. Former students, colleagues, friends, family. And sitting in the front row, David Miller and 2 of Robert's great-grandchildren. They'd flown from Pennsylvania to Berlin to honor the man their grandfather had helped 74 years earlier. During the service, 12 of Hans's former students spoke. Each of them told a story about how Hans had influenced their lives. And every single one of them mentioned the chocolate bar story, the lesson about kindness surviving even in humanity's darkest moments. After the funeral, David visited the plaque at the site of the old military camp. He stood there for a long time, thinking about his grandfather and Hans, about the moment that connected them, about the legacy that had grown from one simple act. A woman approached him. She was in her 40s. She introduced herself as Maria. She'd been one of Hans's students in the 1990s. I became a teacher because of him, she told David. Because of the story he told about your grandfather. I wanted to be the kind of person who showed kindness, even in small ways. I wanted to pass on that lesson. How many students do you have? David asked. I've taught for 15 years now. Maybe 500 students? David did the math in his head. Hans had taught 3,000 students. If even half of them had passed on the lesson to others, if even a fraction of those people had taught it to their students or children, the number was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions, all touched, however indirectly, by a moment that lasted less than 5 minutes on a cold night in 1945. One soldier, one chocolate bar, one choice to be kind. And the ripples were still spreading. Today, the Robert Miller Foundation has provided school supplies to over 50,000 children in war-torn regions: Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, Afghanistan, places where children face the same hunger and desperation Hans once faced. The foundation's logo is simple: a chocolate bar broken into 8 pieces. Every child who receives supplies gets a card that tells the story about Hans and Robert, about a moment of kindness in Berlin in 1945, about how small acts can have enormous impacts. And those children take that lesson with them. They grow up knowing that even in their darkest moments, kindness exists. That even when the world seems cruel, individuals can choose to be good. Some of them will become teachers, or doctors, or simply good people who help others when they can. And the ripples will continue to spread. There's a question people often ask when they hear this story. Would Robert Miller be surprised to know what happened? Would he be amazed that his small act of kindness had such enormous impact? Maybe. Maybe not. Because here's the thing about kindness. We rarely know its full impact. We do something good, something small, and we move on with our lives. We don't see the ripples spread. We don't see how that moment changes someone, how it shapes them, how it influences every choice they make afterward. Robert Miller gave away a chocolate bar and probably never thought about it again. He couldn't have known that one of those children would become a teacher, that teacher would tell the story to 3,000 students, that those students would pass it on to their students and children. He couldn't have known that 74 years later, a foundation bearing his name would be helping children on the other side of the world. He couldn't have known any of that. And yet, it happened anyway. That's the power of kindness. It doesn't need to be witnessed. It doesn't need to be acknowledged. It doesn't need to be remembered by the person who performed it. It just needs to happen. And then it takes on a life of its own. So here's the lesson Hans Weber spent his life teaching. The lesson he learned from Robert Miller on a cold night in May 1945. You never know whose life you're going to change. You never know which small act of kindness will become someone's defining moment. You never know which gesture will ripple out across decades, touching thousands of lives you'll never meet. But it doesn't matter if you know. It doesn't matter if you see the results. What matters is that you do it anyway. You choose kindness. You choose compassion. You choose to help, even when it costs you something. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when no one is watching. Because somewhere, someone will remember. Somewhere, someone's life will be changed. Somewhere, the ripples will spread. Robert Miller broke a chocolate bar into 8 pieces because he saw 8 hungry children and wanted to help. It was that simple. And that simple act echoed across 74 years, across continents, across generations. Today, if you walk through Berlin, you won't see any trace of the ruins that defined the city in 1945. The buildings have been rebuilt. The scars have healed. The city is vibrant and alive. But if you know where to look, you'll find a small plaque. a memorial to a moment that most people walk past without noticing. And if you stop and read that plaque, you'll learn about Robert Miller and Hans Weber, about a chocolate bar and 8 hungry children, about kindness surviving in the darkest of times. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll take that lesson with you. You'll remember it the next time you have a chance to help someone. The next time you have a choice between keeping something for yourself or sharing it with others. Maybe you'll remember that your small act of kindness could be someone else's defining moment, that your gesture could ripple across decades, that your choice to be good could change the world in ways you'll never see. It's just a chocolate bar, just 8 pieces, just a moment. But sometimes, a moment is all it takes. Robert Miller never knew what his kindness meant, but Hans Weber made sure the world would know. Made sure that thousands of people would hear the story. Made sure that the lesson would never be forgotten. And now you know it too. So the question is, what will you do with it? What moment will you create? What kindness will you show? What ripple will you start? Because somewhere, someone is waiting for their moment. Their reminder that humanity can survive anything. Their piece of chocolate on a dark night. Will you be the one to give it to them? Just a moment to change everything.